Hey everyone, Suresh here from SK Talks Games, and in this video I want to show you a few of the gaming handhelds that I got to play around with at the Tokyo Game Show 2025. So this is actually my second trip to Tokyo this year. The first one was in July, which was my very first time in Japan. I loved it so much, as soon as I got back home I had to make plans to come back and do it again. So yeah, everything was like booked for about 2 months in advance, and about 2 weeks before I was about to get on the plane to actually come to Tokyo, I found out that the Tokyo Game Show was going to be on. This in itself was a really nice surprise that I was able to add as an activity to the itinerary that I was compiling together, but what made things a lot more interesting was when I saw gaming handhelds at the show. So yeah, like I had no idea I was going to get hands-on with these devices until I was like physically there at the show. I'll start with the big one, the ROG Xbox Ally and Xbox Ally X. I got to play around with both models, but really more so the Ally X. And the first thing that popped at me was how comfortable they both felt to hold in my hands. Even though they do weigh a little bit more than the regular Ally devices, these new ones just felt lighter. The ASUS staff at the booth told me that they've had a lot of similar reactions from media who got to try these devices for the first time, and this is because the grips really help distribute the weight of the device. And honestly, they're right. As I was holding it, it really didn't feel like I was holding the big screen and everything else that's in the middle, but only the grips on the sides. I actually own the original Ally X, and I've always struggled with its ergonomics, especially if I have to hold it for more than like 15 to 20 minutes, because I always naturally end up using my pinkies as support. They end up feeling quite sore after a while. It was really weird holding these devices and feeling how nice and light they felt. Like, I feel like I could have easily held these devices and like played with them for a good couple of hours without feeling fatigued, unlike what typically happens when I do the same with the original Ally X. And like really the only device that I can compare it to in terms of ergonomics when it comes to a device that I've extensively used before is going to be the Steam Deck. And really, to take it a step further, I would say that these Ally devices probably feel more comfortable than the Steam Deck, which should say a lot. Now, one of the things that I really wanted to test and find out when it comes to these new Ally devices was how the D-pad and the face buttons and the shoulder and the trigger buttons feel. And I should mention that I wasn't able to really hear the buttons or anything like that because the showroom was just so loud. You know, there was so much going on. So yeah, I wasn't able to hear whether the buttons are clacky or not. But I can say this, they felt nice. They weren't mushy, but they weren't like mechanical either. So yeah, like I said, I couldn't really hear how clacky or loud they get, and this is probably going to be the same thing for the rest of the devices that I'm going to talk about in this video, because yeah, the showroom was just so loud. Any of the devices that I tried to really get a feel for the loudness of the D-pad and the face buttons and the shoulder and the triggers and everything, I couldn't really hear it. So just keep that in mind for the rest of the video. Anyways, the next thing that grabbed my attention was the performance of these devices, particularly the Ally X model. I got to play a couple of games on it. The first one was Elden Ring, Nightreign. And I gotta tell you, immediate reaction was how beautiful the game looked when I was using it, when I was playing it. But I also have to mention that, you know, I've never played Nightreign before, and the last time I played Elden Ring was a couple of years ago when it first came out. So, you know, at the show I couldn't really remember how the game works, what the controls are, and, you know, everything being labeled in Japanese in game, it was quite hard for me to figure things out and decide what to do or like where to go in the game. So yeah, it was a bit of a confusing experience as I was trying things out. I ended up just sort of roaming around, and eventually I ran into dogs and some kind of guard, which, you know, I immediately died anyways because I didn't know what I was doing. But I can say this for sure, the game just ran absolutely beautifully, and the performance was buttery smooth from my experience. Next, I tried a turn-based game. I honestly can't remember what it was called, and to be honest, just like before, I didn't really know what I was doing because everything was in Japanese and I don't read Japanese. So yeah, I didn't spend too much time playing it, but from my experience, the game ran beautifully. It was sharp and smooth. Now, the last game I got to play around with was Doom: The Dark Ages, and this is probably the game I got to spend the most amount of time with. I also had a couple of the ASUS staff sort of helping me and answering my questions while I was testing things out, which was really nice. They also asked me a question, which was weird. I've never had that before, but essentially they just wanted to get my opinion on the ergonomics and the buttons layout. mean, like for a game like this, I'd need to reach the joysticks and the buttons, right? I probably won't be using the D-pad. But if I was to play a game that's more D-pad centric, then I feel like it'd be a bit of a problem because it's quite, I don't know, I have medium-sized hands, so it's like, but for this, for Doom, I feel like that's perfect. Like I can reach everything I need to reach. And so yeah, as I also mentioned to them, I thought the ergonomics of the device was fantastic, and the placement of the joysticks, the D-pad and the face buttons was also great. I just thought the D-pad was sort of a bit further away from my left thumb, which would probably make it a little bit uncomfortable if you're playing a D-pad centric game. But then I also thought, you know, if someone's spending $1,000 on a device like this, they're probably not going to focus too much on playing D-pad centric games, so I think they'll be fine. But going back to the performance of the Ally X, the staff wouldn't allow me to dig too deep into like the settings and the options of the device, or even the game itself to see, you know, what was happening, but they did show me like a benchmark graph of sorts. Now, I wouldn't say this was a super accurate for me to benchmark everything because I wasn't able to physically play the game as the benchmark was running. So the game was sort of running in the background, you know, like my character was getting attacked and things were happening. So it's not like the game was paused and the benchmark was running, but I wasn't like actively playing the game. And, you know, keeping all that in mind from what I saw on that graph, the game was pulling something like over 100 FPS, not too far above 100, maybe like around 101, 102. I think I saw 109 as well, but it was floating around 100 FPS mark, which, I mean, I thought it was pretty damn cool. So yeah, you know, I can't tell if the actual gameplay was getting anywhere near 100 FPS, but to the naked eye, the pictures look sharp and the performance was buttery smooth, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised if it was able to maintain a consistent 60 FPS at all times. But yeah, other than that, I asked them if I could try the new Xbox OS big picture mode thing, and they said no, which was really disappointing. I just thought since this thing is coming out in a couple of weeks, the devices that they did have on display would probably be running something a little bit closer to the release candidate, so I don't know why they're still sort of particular about not people seeing what's going on in this OS. In any case, that was my time at the ASUS booth. Of course, they had other stuff, like they had a gaming phone and gaming laptops and other gaming peripherals that they were showcasing to people. I just wasn't interested in any of that stuff. I just wanted to see the new ROG Ally X. And yeah, I'm glad I got to do that. Next, I was really surprised to see OneXPlayer also present at the show. Their booth sort of popped out of nowhere. Like, you know, I was walking around and looking at stuff and then, like, bam, it was right in front of me. And at first, I didn't think too much about it. And then slowly I was like, wait, I know these guys. Now, they had multiple devices on display and I got to try a few of them. The first one was this like big tablet looking device running Windows that had joysticks attached to the sides, kind of like a Nintendo Switch. It was an impressive looking device. I'm not exaggerating this. Like the performance looked great, the pictures looked great. I was actually kind of surprised that it's running Windows because my experience when it comes to handhelds and Windows has always been kind of janky. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's something that I'm gonna use for long periods of time. Like, it's just that screen was just way too big, and I just don't picture myself lying on a couch holding that big screen in front of my face. The one device that I really wanted to check out was the OneXSugar Sugar 1. And I did have to wait a little bit before I could get my hands on it because there were a few people ahead of me who also had the same idea. When I did get my hands on it finally, the first thing that popped to mind was the level of engineering and design that's gone into creating a device like this. And it wasn't just one aspect or the other. Like, it's not like just the engineering part of it was great or just the design part of it is great. It was insane to me how the engineering and the design part of this worked together to create a device like this. It also looked a lot smaller than I thought it would. Like, for some reason, I thought it was going to be a little bit larger. Like, I thought it was going to be 20 to 30% bigger. But yeah, it was just way more compact than I thought. Now, do I genuinely see myself playing games on this thing? Absolutely not. My ADHD would not allow me to leave that device alone and just play games with it for more than 15 seconds. Like, I just had to constantly change things around and flip it around and try different things until, you know, I thought I was going to find the perfect form. But yeah, it's just something that wouldn't settle for me. And I probably had a good maybe like 20 minutes with this device. I'm telling you, in that 20 minutes, I just couldn't settle on one form factor. It was just so much fun playing around with it, kind of like playing with Lego sets but with like really strong magnets. And also the screens didn't look that great. Having gone through the footage now, I can see that their screens were like full of fingerprints, like smudged to hell, and that kind of makes sense. They've a whole weekend, thousands of people have gone and touched these devices. And, thinking about it a little bit more, I remember seeing staff at ASUS and AYANEO booths constantly going over devices that have been used by people after almost each use case. They go over it with a microfiber cloth to sort of make it look shiny for the next person, which wasn't happening at OneXPlayer. So yeah, that's probably why the screens didn't look that great. And just the one more thing that I wasn't super impressed with when it comes to the OneXSugar 1 was the software that it was running. I mean, at some point, the nice lady who was sort of demoing the thing for me had to reboot the device because it was just starting to bug out a lot, which isn't a good sign. I really feel like with a device that has this much intricate design and engineering gone into it, you really need to nail the software for everything to come together nicely. Otherwise, like I said, it just feels like a Lego set with really strong magnets attached to it. And I should also mention, obviously, I wasn't able to use any emulators on these devices. So yeah, the best I could do was basically maybe running the game on one screen and maybe watching a YouTube video on the second screen. So in my opinion, I wasn't really pushing the device as far as, I could. But, the tools that I was given were quite limited. The next booth that I went into was AYANEO's, which again was a big surprise because I just wasn't expecting them to be at the Tokyo Game Show, like at all. This was particularly exciting for me because I've actually got an AYANEO Pocket DS pre-ordered from them, which should be arriving, according to them, sometimes in mid-October, which is just about the time when I get back from Japan. So yeah, this was really exciting for me to be able to get some hands-on time with it, to see what I should expect when I finally get my own when I get back home. So at the booths, they had a number of different devices, and the first one that I wanted to try was, of course, the Pocket DS. Now, I'm not gonna lie, the device feels hefty. Like, this thing is a big chunker. It feels like a chunk. It doesn't look it. It feels heavy. It feels very hefty, which could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on who you ask. But for me, like, it felt nice. It felt premium. I don't know if it's because I have that customer who's pre-ordered bias, like I'm trying to justify it for myself. But, I'm trying my best to be as unbiased as possible. And I'm telling you, as I was holding the device, it felt nice. And just as a comparison, the Xbox Ally X weighs more than the AYANEO Pocket DS, which are two completely different devices anyways. Like, I'm not saying, they're the same device. Of course not. But we're talking about, the weight of the device. The ROG Xbox Ally X, in comparison to the Pocket DS, felt lighter. So even though it weighs more, definitely on paper, it's a heavier device, but holding it felt lighter. Whereas the Pocket DS didn't look as heavy as it felt. Like, when I first looked at it, I was like, oh, that's cool. But when I picked it up, I was like, oh, wow, this is heavy. Now, I personally don't mind the weight of the Pocket DS. Personally, it's not a device that I intend on taking places with me. It's mostly going to be at home, either on the couch or at a desk somewhere. Like, I'm not planning on taking this thing with me out on trips and things like that. This device will stay at home. So yeah, that extra weight is not going to bother me. But if you're someone who does intend on taking this thing out with you to different places, maybe on public transport or to school or something like that, it's something to keep in mind that this thing is a chunk. And I should say this as well, that even though it felt chunky, it still felt quite comfortable to hold. Like, my hands just naturally wrapped around it, and I didn't feel like I needed to use my pinkies to support the weight of the device like I do with the original Ally X. But the thing that did disappoint me was how hard it was to open the lid of this device. Like, I had to actually physically use two hands to open it. There was no one-handed operation here at all. Now, like I said before, this is kind of disappointing for me because one of the things that I love about my DS and 3DS is that, you can easily open it with two hands. It's not a struggle. If you really try, you can also do it with one hand, but that's not the case with the Pocket DS. And the thing about those Nintendo devices is that, sure, you do need to use two hands to open them, but they're not as heavy as the Pocket DS. So they kind of feel a little bit nicer when it comes to operating them. So the Pocket DS was quite difficult to open. Like I said, I'm definitely going to be using two hands to do this. Once the lid was open though, I was completely wowed. Man, that screen, especially the big OLED screen on top, it just looked absolutely gorgeous. I mean, the bottom screen was also nice to look at, but the star of the show clearly is that top OLED high refresh rate screen. Now, I already knew about the 60 FPS limitation when both screens are on at the same time, so that's not really something that surprised me. Very recently, we found that the AYN has figured out a way to sort of fix this problem on their Thor device, so I'm sort of hopeful that AYANEO can also figure something out. But yeah, both of the screens looked absolutely beautiful, even at just 60 FPS. I tried each of the screens individually as well, and like I said, they both looked absolutely sharp and beautiful. Now, speaking of the software, I should say this, I didn't get to dig too deep and try things out as much as I like to. And truth be told, this wasn't because of Japanese language barriers or anything like that. No, the labels and everything were in English on the Pocket DS and all the other devices. Gameplay was different. The games were in Japanese, but menus and things like that when it came to the device settings were all in English. So that's not an excuse for me. The thing is, the showroom was just so loud, and with my sensitivity when it comes to loud noises and big crowds and things like that, it was very difficult for me to be able to really focus on what I was trying to do on a device. You got to remember, I was also trying to figure out how to work the camera, which is the first time that I was trying to do that. So there was a lot going on, and there's only so much I could really do. So yeah, I wasn't able to dig too deep in terms of the settings and the performance and things like that. I did do some of the basic ones, like I said, changing the screen from the top to the bottom and things like that. Or the other thing I tried was just using one screen at a time, like the top screen or the bottom screen, changing the performance mode from gaming to streaming to whatever else they had. Like, that was just a press of a button, and from what I saw, everything worked perfectly fine. There was no glitches or anything like that. Of course, I didn't have access to any emulators. Like, I would have loved to try some 3DS or DS emulation, but I could just sense Nintendo ninjas hanging around the booth just waiting for someone to even mention the word emulation. So yeah, that's not something that was going to happen. In the end, it was mostly Android games, along with maybe a YouTube video or a browser running on the other screen. Games like Genshin Impact and things like that. So pretty standard games, and yeah, this chip can handle everything. We all know that. There's no problem with that, so there's no surprises there. And the next thing that I noticed, which gave me a bit of a laugh, was how small the joysticks are. I know reviewers have already talked about this, that the joysticks are too small, and I'm here to say that yes, they are very small. In fact, it gave me a laugh because it made the device just look so goofy, but I wouldn't say they were uncomfortable. I did only use the device for about 10 to 15 minutes, so maybe for a longer gaming session that might be a bit of a problem. That's something to keep in mind for myself when I do get my device. I'm going to try it out and see, how that works. The good thing about it is that these joysticks are interchangeable, so you can replace it with bigger ones, which is probably what I'm going to do if it ends up being something that's a bit uncomfortable. The other thing about the controls that I saw and noticed on the bottom screen was the layout of the buttons. And it was interesting for me because, watching the reviewers, I thought, oh man, this is going to be too much. But in person, it didn't really feel like it. And quite frankly, I actually really liked having access to that big screen on the bottom. So yeah, I think I'll be fine with those buttons. Those tiny little itty bitty buttons at the very bottom of the screen though, yeah, I'm not too sure about that. They're just so small and thin, you kind of really have to try to remember where they are and what they each do, because it was just a bit annoying. Like, they were just so thin and small, it was kind of hard to see them. I'm not sure how easily you'd be able to see them, especially on the black model, so that's something to keep in mind. As I said at the top of the video, I couldn't really hear how loud or clacky the buttons are on this device because the showroom was just so loud, but from my experience, the buttons felt great. They weren't too mushy, they weren't too mechanical. For me, that's the sweet spot. I don't want something that's like pressing a pillow, but I don't really like the feel of a mechanical keyboard either. I want something sort of right in the middle. And that's what it felt like to me as I was using the Pocket DS at the AYANEO booth. The next device that I got to play around with while I was there was the KONKR Pocket Fit. I gotta tell you, this device, even though it's meant to be the budget brand or version of AYANEO, it felt premium. Like, I don't know what kind of plastic they're using or what kind of magic they're applying to these devices, but it didn't feel budget. It felt premium. And pairing the feeling of this device with the great ergonomics of it, I think the KONKR Fit is going to be a massive hit. I'll go a step further. It felt a little bit better than the Pocket DS, at least in my hands. The thing that I was really interested to finding out when it comes to the KONKR Pocket Fit was the screen. Because I knew it doesn't have an OLED screen. But man, if I didn't know this already and someone showed me the KONKR Pocket Fit and said, hey, this is an OLED screen, I would believe them. Like, the images looked so sharp, the color saturation was perfect, and that high refresh rate, you can't go wrong with that. And honestly, if I didn't already have an Odin 3 pre-ordered with AYN, at this point, I would probably pre-order the KONKR if I were in the market for a device like this. Especially after seeing it in person and having held it in my hand and, played around with it for a bit. Like, this thing is great. I'm gonna say this, and this might be a bit of a stretch, but if we had some sort of prize for the device of the year, I think the KONKR Pocket Fit might win it. It's priced very well, especially with the recent announcement that they're going to keep the super early bird prices to the end of the campaign. It feels premium, even though it's meant to be a budget device, and the screen looks beautiful, even though it's only an LCD panel. And remember, this is coming from someone who decided to order the Odin 3 instead of the KONKR. When it comes to the performance though, I played the couple of Android games that they had on it, like Genshin Impact or whatever else they had, and it felt great. I mean, the chip is well optimized, it's strong enough to run anything you throw at it. Again, wasn't able to do any emulation, because that's a no-no, but yeah, the thing ran everything I threw at it beautifully. I also got to play around with AYANEO's 4x3 budget handheld, the Pocket Air Mini. And similar to the KONKR Pocket Fit, the Air Mini also felt so premium. Must be the same plastic they're using, because this thing just felt premium. It did not feel like think of a cheap Ambernick device. Now, I personally really liked the version with the green buttons on top. I thought that looked really cool in person. And for some weird reason, I thought it'd be the same size as the Ambernick 477M, but no, it's actually a lot smaller. For some reason, I thought they'd be around the same size, but they're not. And obviously, the performance is quite different as well. But the thing that really let me down when it comes to the Pocket Air Mini was the fact that the software they were running on it was complete jank. I was not able to run any games on either of the test models that I had on the floor. I feel like someone at some point did something to these devices. The staff at the booth weren't able to fix it. So they kind of put those two cheaper devices in the corner of the booth at the back where it wasn't so easily accessible and it was kind of harder to see. And, those devices are quite small as well and not as premium or flashy or whatever. I really wanted to see what this thing can do, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that. I'm sure by the time this thing comes out, this isn't going to be a problem. I know AYANEO has a reputation for a lot of different things, but from my reading and my understanding and my experience so far, when it comes to software, they tend to do it really well. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if someone at the show did something to these devices and the staff just didn't know how to fix it. And the last handheld that I got to try out at the Tokyo Game Show this year was the MSI Claw A8. And man, that thing is huge. The screen was quite nice, and the game it was running looked beautiful. It was sharp, and the frame rate was buttery smooth. I'll be honest though, at that point, I was quite tired. I've been walking for like almost 8 hours straight. I didn't really feel like digging too deep into the settings and things like that, even though there was no one there stopping me. I apologize for that. This is all new to me and I'm learning as I go. But yeah, I mean, to the naked eye, it seemed like this, whatever the game they were running, it was some kind of driving game. It was comfortably and consistently holding 60 FPS. The only thing that really stood out to me was just how big and huge the device was. Like, I've got medium-sized hands, so I don't exactly have small hands, but I don't have the biggest hands either. And typically when it comes to devices, I feel most devices comfortable to hold, bar the original Ally X, which, you have to use your pinkies. If a device has relatively good ergonomics, I'm able to hold it for a long period of time without much trouble. Yeah, I wouldn't say that was going to be the case with the MSI Claw A8. The device is too big, too heavy, and from what I saw at the show, the ergonomics weren't exactly the best. So yeah, I think that's about everything I got to see and play with at the Tokyo Game Show this year when it comes to gaming handhelds. But obviously, I got to see a lot of other stuff as well. Like, there was this one booth where they had these two controllers and they had little screens on them, and the screens were touchscreen, and essentially the point of it was to be able to configure it to different profiles and change settings around and things like that, which was really cool. And with the cheaper model, the top plate is interchangeable, so you could use a different plate depending on how you feel and what game you're playing or whatever. So it's not exactly a brand new idea, but I thought it was really cool to have it on the showroom, showing it to everyone. Also, at the same booth, they had this like train controller thing for playing Train Simulator. It was super cool. There was even a World War II tank simulator where you had the actual tank controls in front of you. Like, it was nuts. There were so many cosplayers, which is really cool to see and experience. They had some cool performances for a few new games. Like, there was this really creepy cosplayer playing as one of the enemies in the new Silent Hill F game. That was really cool to see. There were also booths that just had the most amazing set designs I've ever seen. Like, there was a scary statue thing at the Nioh 3 booth. I don't know what it is, I've never played the game, but it looked cool as hell. And it was absolutely massive and full of small details. Little Nightmares 3 had this massive hand that was just unbelievable to look at and just stand in front of. The booth for Battlefield 6 was just on another level. They had like a tank and a helicopter hanging around. It was insane. And of course, there was also lots and lots and lots and lots of video games to play. This was one of the things that I unfortunately missed out on, because for a lot of the games that I wanted to try, especially with the big hitters, like Sony games or Capcom and whatnot, you actually had to pre-register your name. So by that point, I'd missed the deadline and everything, so I wasn't able to get hands-on with any of the new games or anything like that, which was disappointing, but hey, that's something for me to remember for next time. I'm gonna have to plan ahead a little bit better. But one thing that really stood out to me was how dedicated some of these people were who were standing in line to try these new games. Like, the Sony booth or Capcom or even Riot Games, there were lines, and these people handling the lines had signs on them that would say, the wait time is 80 or 90 or even 100 minutes. And there were stacks of people just chilling in line, just waiting their turn to play the newest, hottest games. But if I'm being completely honest, the highlight of the entire show for me personally happened at the very beginning when I first walked in. This was when I saw Randy Pitchford, the CEO of Gearbox, talking about himself for like 30 minutes straight. And then, he decided to show us a 20-second clip of the new Borderlands 4 DLC that was coming out like later next year or whatever. And then he went straight back to talking about himself. He even shared a lot of little intimate details about himself with us, strangers who he's never met before. For example, did you know that Randy is a professional magician? Which isn't a, so intimate detail. But did you also know that he's a gambler? I don't know if that's something I would proudly share with a group of people I'd never met before in my life. I'm not a gambler, but if I was, I don't know if that's something I would share with strangers. But that's just me. At the end of the day, I guess Randy's gonna Randy. So yeah, this personally for me was just a really fun experience. I did miss out on trying a lot of video games. Like I said, I didn't know I was supposed to register for them and things like that. So like I saw a lot of people playing Ghost of Yotei or some of the new Capcom games and things like that, that I was just sort of watching people play it in jealousy, but that's fine, that's okay. I still had a really, really good time at the show. I thought it was really great. So for me, it was mostly like a stroll through the grounds, looking around, experiencing, and taking everything in. Anyways, this video went for way longer than I thought. If you found it helpful or entertaining or found any sort of value in it, I would really appreciate it if you would give it a like. And I mean, why not consider subscribing to the channel? I do have another video that I'm currently filming. I am still in Tokyo. This is my hotel room, so I'm still going to be here for another week or so. I've made a list of some retro consoles that I would like to purchase whilst I'm here in Tokyo, but I'm not just going to go and pay like $200 for it. I want to get a good deal on it. So my goal is to go to as many secondhand stores like Hard Offs or Book Offs or whatever else and see if I can get the best deal for the device that I want. So yeah, if that's something you're interested in, make sure you get subscribed to the channel so when that drops you don't miss it. In any case, thank you so much for watching to the end of the video, and I'll see you in the next one.